Welcome to the colloquium this afternoon. Dr. Kaustav Bhattacharyya is giving us the talk today titled The Formation of India's Bureaucratic Elite. Kaustav trained as an engineer in Bangalore before doing an MBA in an institute in Europe, in Brussels, and after which he did a PhD at the Cass Business School in London. And his dissertation research examined Indian civil service elites and how they functioned as a community of practice. And I know that West Bengal was his field site for that study. But in addition to this, Kaustav has a special interest in the culture of elites. And it's a comparative curiosity. He has studied elite cultures outside of bureaucracy as well, in European countries and in India and in different parts of India. Unfortunately, this talk today may not give him the opportunity to get into that directly, but I hope the Q&A might give us a sense for how fine of a grasp he has on this matter that very few bother to study in the social sciences. So Kaustav will give us the talk for about 45 minutes, after which there'll be time for Q&A. The audience should feel free to key in their questions in the comments box, and we'll pass them on to Kaustav afterwards. So over to Kaustav.
Hi, good afternoon, Chandan and my dear students. Thank you very much, Chandan, for inviting me over and offering me this opportunity to talk about this topic, which is very dear to my heart. It was my dissertation theme, and I spent a good 4 years doing empirical research, collecting data and writing it up. And this is my first academic presentation of this topic to a group of students. So it's a very special day, and I hope all of you will enjoy the presentation and actively ask questions. Now, here is the first slide. If it's not visible, just let me know, because I put it in the PowerPoint mode. So just send a comment. And many of you would be intrigued by this little blue comment over there, a blue caption, "Stalin's a few hundred men." And this is one of the most fascinating and let's say what we would call takeaway for me from this research. And I will explain in the subsequent slides why I'm so fascinated by this comment. Now, this is a snapshot of what the discussion or what my research was fundamentally. It looked at this whole notion of Indian civil services. They've been called the Barasahs of the Raj. I don't have to translate that expression. By the way, I understand the audience would be quite young, so many of you may not be familiar with some of these expressions which were in vogue in Indian common parlance even until the 80s or 90s. So please feel free to ask me what does that mean, because all of these are very, very contextual, and if you don't grasp the meaning, the presentation will not be very interesting. So the Indian civil service actually traces its birth to the East India Company, which all of you know came to India as a trading company. It started sometime, it was formed in 1600s. It was trading for a good 100 years, or more than 100 years, 150 years before it started entertaining political aspiration. And it formed a Habitus College in 1809 to train the administrators once it has acquired the political power. And then in 1858, you have this transfer of responsibility for administration of India to the British Crown. And that's happening right the next year after the First War of Independence, or the Sepoy Mutiny, or the Great Mutiny, whatever you would like to call it. Let's say the rejection of the British regime, the company regime. And in 1853 of the competitive exam-based system. All of these will be explained later. But And there was a particular kind of people, were the typical Oxbridge classics, people who went to this ancient twin universities of Oxford and Cambridge, and they were inspired by Plato's idea of guardians of state. And they were predominantly generalists. I mean, they were not specialists as in lawyers or experts. And the ideals of the ICS was amateur gentlemen, notion of fairness, justice. Again, this would be discussed in detail later on. And this amateur gentleman was basically also the ideal of what a British educated elite is, or what should be. Now, the fourth point is very interesting and very, very pivotal for this presentation. It's when India becomes independent in 1947 that we find a very shall I say, strategic compromise, a very, clever, maverick compromise that we will continue with the ICS structure, mode of recruitment, and the ideals, and also the idea of the civil servant. So there's a very stirring speech by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who defended, I think in a Congress session in 1943 or so, I have the speech as part of my thesis. If you're interested, I can send it across, where he extolled the virtues, and he makes this mention that a good workman doesn't quarrel with his tools. So let's keep the ICS, even if independent. Now, here you have a photograph of Sir Henry Cotton dispensing justice as a district commissioner with loads of people around him. Living in a tent. Now, this is a very, very powerful image, and you will understand once this presentation is over what exactly this means. And the second one is the Mussoorie Academy. Okay. Now, this is where I'm going to explain what is Stalin's a few hundred men. Now, why does this expression fascinate me so much? And it has left an indelible mark. That's because, most of us wouldn't have expected the Soviet communist revolutionary leader or hero, Joseph Stalin, to praise this capitalist, exploitative, rapacious British Empire. So, of course, he didn't praise, but there was a certain element of envy. I mean, look at him. I mean, he's talking about lamenting the absurdity of the fact that so much of the world is ruled by British Empire. And this happens in a conversation with the German foreign minister, von Ribbentrop. This was the period when the Nazis have come to power.
Kaustav, sorry to interrupt, but the slides are not moving. We are still on the first slide.
Oh, sorry.
The images weren't seen.
Can you, has it moved?
No.
What's happening now? Where are you?
Okay, we're moved now, but we didn't see the images you talked about a while back.
Oh, they were just tiny little photos here.
Okay.
Huh?
Okay. Thank you.
And he then, tells this von Ribbentrop that, look, it's ridiculous that a few hundred Englishmen should dominate India. Now, what this tells me about Joseph Stalin is this gentleman, if you want to call him Joseph Stalin, was a very astute person. He understood administration. He understood efficiency. He was like a corporate boss who says, listen, I'm getting this job done with so few managers, and it's so efficient, it's so effective. So it brings out a very different facet of Joseph Stalin. Now, right when you are done with Joseph Stalin, you have Bismarck, the first chancellor of independent Germany, unified Germany, praising Britain's work in India would be one of its lasting monuments, again, referring to the ICS. Then you have the French Abbé Dubieux, who is extolling the virtues of uprightness, character, education, ability. Then you have this Austrian, who themselves had their own empire. And if you have read novels by Philip Roth, if I'm not mistaken, or Joseph Roth, I think. Chandan, please do correct me if I'm getting confused somewhere, the famous Austrian novelist. And he wrote a lot about the Austro-Hungarian civil servants. And they also were a multinational empire like the British. And look what he's talking about. He's talking about miracles and the usual qualities of perseverance, courage, but again, of a handful of officials and magistrates who govern and administer the Indian Empire. Now, why is this so impressive, this handful of Indian civil servants? Because we have to understand the geographical spread of India was much bigger than what you have today, much larger. It included Pakistan, Myanmar, Bangladesh, even some parts of Afghanistan. So it was a huge subcontinental geographical entity which were being managed by a few hundred people. And I would also like to mention another person who I realized this morning, but I didn't put it in the slide, is a German hardcore right-wing thinker called von Bernhardi. Now, von Bernhardi, like a lot of German conservatives, believed in this right to colonize by the higher civilization. And it's anybody's guess he meant the European countries as higher civilization. And he said they could go and annex a nation. And he said, but sometimes we have to see if who is a higher civilization and a lower. And he says, when the subject nations has adopted higher methods and conceptions of life, and the difference in civilization has consequently loosened, we really then have to revisit, And then he goes on to say, such a state of things is growing ripe in British India. So please understand, the British Indian administration was a source of envy or even for competing European powers. It was a source of, it evoked admiration. And so this is where the Indian civil services officers stood, okay? Now, let's go back to where it all started. Now, East India Company assumed a political and administrative role in 1790. Now, many of you would be knowing what was going on around that period. It's 30 years later than the Battle of Plassey. Now, what happened in Battle of Plassey? In Battle of Plassey, the East India Company, under the great leadership, or the able leadership, and I mean it quite sarcastically, of Lord Robert Clive, dislodged the last ruling Nawab of Bengal. And he got rid of that machinery. It was a lot of deceit, guile, treachery. I mean, even now in Bengal, the word Mir Jafar or Lakshman Seth, not Jagat Seth, sorry, not Lakshman Seth. Jagat Seth means, has become metaphor of treachery and all that. And it's also even evoked in the current electoral battle. So then the company starts appointing district collectors, but they are still operating with the permission of the Delhi Mughal Empire. I think it was Shah Alam, the emperor, who gave the East India Company the Diwaniyat rights, to go and collect taxes. And then Lord Wellesley, who was the Governor General of India, felt that these chaps need to be trained. These who are going to be sent out to the district to collect taxes and administer justice. And he did form a college in India at the Fort William. If you have been to Calcutta, you know it's a very impressive structure and a very sprawling campus, which is also the headquarters of the Eastern Command of the Indian Army. But he was reprimanded by the bosses in Britain. He said, no, we should have a training here. So they formed this East India College, Herts, in Haileybury in 1809. And interestingly, this college had an operating life of 50 years. So it starts in 1809, it closes in 1859. And it was similar, it was along similar lines to an English public school in terms of ethos and habitus. Now, I'll discuss the English public school education a little later, but it's a very peculiar kind of an education, which one doesn't find in wide prevalence today. But once upon a time, it was more of a training of a gentleman than, instilling of a lot of academic knowledge or competencies or even skills. It is a certain way of training you to negotiate through life, mostly in the battlefields and things like that. And the discipline and administration was very similar to that of an Oxford or Cambridge, again, the twin ancient universities, which also had a very particular style of pedagogy as compared to the French or the Germans. I will complete this in a rush because I just have 45 minutes, but I'm more than happy to explain and elaborate these points when I'm done. And then remember, the recruitment to this college was purely by nomination of the company directors. There was no entrance exam. There was no GMAT, GRE, nothing. It was purely the directors of the East India Company nominated these young men. And what was their criteria? They have to be able, industrious, good manners, and not bring shame to his nominator, which is like, don't go and swindle a lot of money here, or beat up people, or things like that. And the interview process also evaluated the pleasant manners and social graces. So it tells you it was a closed club. When you do, evaluate pleasant manners and social graces, it means that they were very much biased towards selecting people from a particular social origin. Okay. Now, what did they teach you in this habitus? After all the nomination and you're going to be sent out, first of all, you had to stick around there for 3 years. You had a student curriculum which taught you Oriental languages, including Sanskrit, Western classics. Classics here, it means study of Greece and Rome, ancient Greece and Rome, like Homer and things like that.
Sorry? The slides haven't moved again.
Oh, what's happening?
See, we missed. This is important.
This one, Esprit de Corps, no?
Yes.
Okay.
No, after the Stalin quote, we haven't seen any other slide. I know you've moved on from there.
Yeah, of course. Can you see this? I think, can you flick? I mean, you have the slides. I knew something like I had a premonition. Can you?
No. You have to move it at your end, Kaustav. As you move on.
I have moved. I have been flicking slides. Can you see the historical origins of Indian civil services?
No, we see the Haileybury slide now. The Indian civil services esprit de corps.
Okay. So this was the slide. Okay, this I'll go through it once again. This was my first slide. Can you see this? Imperial rivalry, envy and all. Okay. Historical origins. Can you see this?
No. We're still with the Haileybury slide. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, so you have missed the slide between Stalin's and the Haileybury. There was one slide called Haileybury Crucible of Elites. Can you see that?
No.
Oh, what do I do? Can you pull it up on your end and share it or something? Because that was a very important slide. I don't know. I'm flicking the slides, but this is Stalin's. There's a next one, Crucible of Elites. You can't see that.
No. Let me try to share it from my end.
Oh boy, I don't know what's going on.
No, just wait. This will get sorted out in a second.
I had a premonition, something like that might happen.
No, but it has moved. I think it's just that it's moving at your end and not at this end.
Can't you see Crucible of Elites? I mean, I can see the shared screen here. Shared screen, can you see that?
I'm trying to open the slide on my laptop and I'll try to share it from my side. Each time you want me to move it, just let me know. I hope it will work from here.
I see there are about 16 people.
No, but there are many who are watching from outside the university who won't be listed among the numbers here. Okay, Kaustav, why don't you remove this PowerPoint and I'll share it from my end.
Okay, how do I remove it now? Voila,
okay.
It's gone.
Okay.
Luckily, I had sent you the slides. Somehow I had this premonition or worry about these things.
No, I've never had to share a slide before. This is terrible.
I'm just surprised because, good Lord, I mean.
Yes. Kaustav, we'll have to just depend on your thing. I don't know how. This is just.
Okay, I can always send it. Just one sec. Is it working now? Wait.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Is it
Yeah. We are on the
working?
Stalin slide now.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So this was the second slide. I've already explained it.
Yes.
Next is this one. Okay. This is where I stopped. Now,
Which
another
one?
thing which
Which one? Kaustav, that the next one hasn't come up yet.
Esprit de corps, can you read it?
No.
This
Praveen,
is
can you help
crucible.
here? See, the arrow keys are not working for you, he says.
No, I'm using the enter. I don't even use the arrow key. Can't you see
No,
the
use the arrow
Esprit de corps, Indian Civil
Use the
Services?
arrow key. Use the arrow key, Kaustav.
Okay. Is it working now?
No. Fortunate. No.
Oh.
Praveen, can you share the PowerPoint? Yeah, now we see it. Now we see it.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. So, Helibaries, being inspired by the empires.
So, Kaustav, you should do what you just did to get the slide to move. Whatever you did just now. Okay, please keep doing that.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah. Sorry about this.
I just tweaked the wire. So they also brought in this gymnasium ideal, whatever. I mean, I prefer using the German pronunciation of Plato, the philosopher. Now, he said, a healthy mind in a healthy body. And he sort of encouraged, so Helibaries was encouraged, inspired by Plato, to develop physical abilities and play sports like cricket, rowing, and hunting. Hunting became very big. So you've got a lot of, if you go through old district diaries in places like Bengal, which is the first, let's say, hunting ground of, metaphorically speaking, of the East India Company, the first base, you find a lot of them went pig sticking and things like that. And as a consequence of the education, or if there was a conscious attempt made, I am not sure, but there was a distinct spirit which was fostered at Helibaries. What's you can call the Helibaries esprit de corps, a camaraderie which is built on playing grounds over clean glasses of claret, sharing dorms at the school, and I don't know if this is something very unusual. We all clean glasses when you're at university, and yeah, camaraderie is built around that. And this spirit was about knowing each other, creating a sense of shared purpose, a trust, and this sort of, what you call the old boys club. But what's most important in this whole, there are 2 points which strikes me. One, they always felt they had a broader mission, a bigger mission, that they belong to this very prestigious service. There's a certain grandeur. And the last point which you see there from Mason's book is the fact that they were also quite independent in their outlook. And this is what I saw in the early generation of IS officers, were encouraged by their ISIS superiors and seniors to criticize, if need be, the political masters, criticize the establishment position. So you had some phenomenal indictment of establishment position, although they were part of the same club, like Ashok Mitra's indictment of Bengal, or the British administration's policy with respect to Bengal famine. So this is a very important point, that they were not afraid to incur the displeasure of the authority. Okay. Now, then something interesting happens. In 1853, the famous Lord Macaulay, the same person who wrote that 1834 minute on Indian education, Lord Thomas Babington Macaulay, he headed a committee called the Committee on Indian Civil Services, which is described here as Macaulay Committee Report. And he recommended throwing open the entry to Helibaries based on a competition, open competition, as opposed to the recommendation. So it's going to be more and more meritocratic. And very important for all the viewers today to understand, this was 17 years prior to British Home Civil Services being open to competition, which was based on patronage. Now, there were 3 civil services streams in Britain. One was the Home Civil Services, which is for joining the civil services of Britain. Second was the colonial, which is Sudan, Hong Kong, name it. And third was the Indian civil services. So Indian civil services was so prestigious that it was a separate stream of civil services, and it became meritocratic 17 years before the British Home Civil Services. Now, there is a lot of conversation and discussion which goes on around that, and I can't help but drop the name of a gentleman who is also a friend of Chandan, Professor Asim Srivastav. Now, he does talk about Lord Macaulay a lot, and I think there is a lot of merit that we really need to study what was going on, because this was also the defeudalization of British society. The rising Victorian middle class started developing a sense of ownership of institutions. And I will rope in Chandan here. Chandan and I have often discussed about the notion of custodianship of elites. And I will dwell on how I perceive elites at the end of this presentation, because I have the limited time. I want to wrap it up. There's a whole lot of information. And it was regulated by a Government of India Act. Chandan, I have one quick question for you. Chandan?
The slides have not been moving again. We are still with Esprit, the core slide. I think it's important that we see the slides.
Okay. I don't know. I really don't know when it has moved.
Okay.
And when it...
Okay. Now, Kaustav, what we'll do is I've sent you slides to Praveen. He'll share it, and he will move it as and when you ask them, need them to move.
Okay. So, Praveen, can you go to classics, competition Walla's Indian Civil Services, point 1?
Apologies to the audience. This has never happened. Hard to understand why, but please bear with us.
I mean, technology, but I had a premonition, so that's why I sent you the slides beforehand. I thought something can go wrong.
Okay, there it is.
Okay, so I'm not going to touch. I'll just tell Praveen next one. Okay, is that fine?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Now, I had a question for you, Chandan. If I want to elaborate or explain a point, a broader point, can I do it while I'm doing the slides, or should I wait till the end?
No. Please, feel free. It's really, the structure is completely yours. I mean, it's fine.
Okay. So even if I exit 45 minutes, because I think there are certain points which are very important for your students and the broader audience.
Please feel free. Yes.
Okay. So I want to dwell a little bit about this Macaulay report, because Macaulay was also responsible for the minutes on Indian education. You know that, Chandan, in 1834, which led to this idea of creating a class of Indians, blood in Indian but British English in moral taste, opinion, judgment, and outlook, which now is often sneered as Macaulay ka aulad, or Macaulay's children. And Asim has been talking about it, writing about it. And I sort of had this conversation with Asim coming from my Indian civil service research, which would be very interesting for your audience. Now, we see Macaulay, and this happens quite often in India's interaction with West. We look at the way West projects itself on India, but we don't see what's happening within the Western society, their internal dynamics. Okay, today with the internet and social media and a large diaspora, but I still would say we are still not very well aware of their internal dynamic. Would you agree with that, Chandan?
Okay. Completely, yes.
So what was happening internally in Britain was the defeudalization of the society. There was a new middle class, the bourgeois, which I think Britain was the first society to experience what's called middle class. And what is this middle class? It's not the way it's used in India, that if you can buy refrigerator or television. No, this was the class which grew out of the Industrial Revolution. This is the class which grew outside of the feudal structure. In the feudal structure, what you had was estates. The first estate, the clergy; second estate, the crown or the aristocracy; the third, the peasants; and the fourth was, if I'm not mistaken, the anyway, it's not coming. Okay, Okay, it's not coming to mind. I'm stuck in the fourth estate. Some would call it the media, but I think it was more the rising intellectual or whatever. Now, what is happening? The rise of this new Victorian middle class, combined with their role in the empire, made them confident enough to demand participation in their administration. Because along with the Macaulay report, what's very interesting is the Northcote Trevelyan reform report, which demanded reform of the civil services away from the patronage. So it is the Victorian middle class which sort of saw India as a very interesting, as another friend of mine would call, an employment exchange. This was their, let's say, the laboratory for social reform and social justice. So I think it's very important we realize that these things were not just done in the imperial spirit. There was also a lot of, shall I say, corporatism within the British society, which sort of sometimes took a shape of an imperial exercise. But, we also have to look what is going on internally. Now, the new recruits to the ICS, by the way, one more member of that Macaulay committee report was Mr. Jowett, who later on became master of an Oxford college. And Jowett was very gung-ho about the Indian civil service because Benjamin Jowett, he was a master of Balliol College, because he said most of his students would come and ask, I can't take up the arms, which is the army, or I don't have calling for the robes, which is the priesthood, the clergy. So what do I do? So he coined the term that this was a great career for the picked men of the universities. Now, these new recruits were sneered as competition wallahs. Oh, these competition wallahs, because they thought they would be this bookish hobbledehoys who wouldn't be able to control a horse, who can't comprehend Hindustani. I mean, the whole practical pragmatism which the British celebrated in their elites who were sent to India would be lost. They would be this very pedantic and more kind of German types, the scholarly. But also I would like to make a mention here that this horse control, you see, even until mid-60s or late 60s, if you talk to the IS officers of that generation, you had this horse trainer or training master called Naval Singh at the Mussoorie Academy. And he would, admonish the young trainees that how can you control a district if you can't control a horse? And I have been told by a British civil servant that when the composition on the demographics of the civil servants were changing, IAS, someone said, why do we need horse riding? But the logic was, if you can't control a horse, you can't control a district. So, many of these...
Fascinating.
Sorry?
Yes, it is fascinating.
Yeah. Many of these were very interesting metaphors for this masculinity, So I'm just also trying to connect with the broader sociological themes. And then you have this Haileybury graduate, Saturn Kerr. We are more than happy to be surpassed in talent. I mean, you can surpass us in talent, that's not an issue, but only if you can equal us in integrity and honor. Now, I think this sentiment is even today shared in a different way by people of our generation, Chanda. We are quite reluctant to ascribe an elite status to someone solely on talent. Am I right or wrong?
Depends on the field.
Yeah, in public life. I think in public life, we always look for something beyond the technocratic talent.
Yes.
I think this, some of these things, I'm just trying to demonstrate how we have absorbed it as part of our own folklore and part of our own ethos,
Yes.
Or even in science, we quite often would say about, for example, today I received WhatsApp about some policy which said it was written by technocrats who didn't take into account the citizen and, things like that. So we constantly do talk about that. And these concerns, finally, see, this is again a very classical case of British compromise, the elite compromise by which Britain, propelled along that, okay, fine, we'll have an interview as part of the evaluation. And we'll also include physical sports in the qualifying exam, like horse riding. In case of the post-independence IS, the horse riding happened after you qualified. Uh, and yeah, and then of course, so they sort of said, fine, we have reached a kind of a middle point. Now the competition before you entered Helibaries was based on subjects like French, German, Italian, math, sciences. So a very conventional university degree, along with Greek and Latin. Greek and Latin, I hope your students realize, played a very, very important role in the imagination of British elites. This is idea of a classical a world of West, not just Europe. And again, I had this conversation with Asim again, because he's one of the few people interested, that there was very little in common between Greece and Rome before the British Empire in terms of their history and society. So this was a construct of the elites to create this mythical classical world from which they can draw and in a way justify, one would say, or their role as global imperial powers. Okay, Praveen, next slide, please.
Kaustav, Praveen his system is hanging. Kaustav, why don't you put up your share for PPT again, but go to the right slide? Go to the right slide.
Can you go to the? Can you see the next slide? Please, two no. Competition dollars two.
No, you'll have to share it from your end.
I'm sharing from my. Okay. I have to go back. The full thing. Okay.
But make sure you're on that slide as you share it,
sure.
Or while you share it. Yeah.
What's happening?
Very sorry about this.
Oh well. Okay, can you see the two Indian civil services too, competition wallas?
There is no PPT on the screen at all.
Can you go? Who is sharing it? That's wonderful. Someone is clicking it.
No, apparently you can't share. Ask him to continue is what Praveen says. He'll be back and he'll put this PPT. Just keep talking, Kaustav. Keep talking.
Okay. Yeah, I think there isn't much of a photograph or anything. So I think the conversation is more is what it is all about. You see this new method of recruitment, and there have been a lot of changes. You see, first they said, look, you should enter the civil service at 19. And, there was a very big concern that you have to be quite young to enter the civil services, which, of course, we can ask ourselves the question that today some of the people joining civil services are in the 30s. But there are two rationale, very powerful rationale. One, they said that you have to be quite young to be able to take the blast of a district posting and the outdoors, which may not be relevant today. I mean, you're not riding horses, you have duck bungalows, you've got highways. It's a very different world. And secondly, can you be inculcated? Can you be indoctrinated in a system with its very distinct values when you are above a certain age? So they first, wanted to make it 19, but then they found you can't really get them to complete a university degree because they end up spending a lot of time. And by the time they arrive, they get a junior posting. So after a lot of dilly-dallying and back and forth and, trial and error, iteration, they decided 23. So what do you go and get yourself a degree, and then you spend 2 years at one of the recommended 7 British universities. And then you come to India based on you're assigned, first of all, a district or a province based on your ranking, and then you are sent to India to be a district ICS officer, a professional. Now, these 7 British universities, is very interesting that it was dominated, the output, the number of people who finally qualified was by Oxford and Cambridge, although those 7 universities went predominantly Oxford and Cambridge. It included universities in Scotland like Edinburgh, St Andrews, Glasgow, Aberdeen. It had one Irish university, Trinity College Dublin, and 2 universities in London, King's College and University College of London. But the Oxford and Cambridge played a very predominant role in churning out the graduates. So between 1855 to 1859, 30% of the successful entrants came from Oxford and 25% from Cambridge. And then the training curriculum at this universities, again, classical Oriental languages, European vernacular of the province where you're going to be posted. And I would like to share a very funny anecdote. KPS Menon, who was selected for the Indian Civil Service, was assigned the Kerala province. I think it was North Kerala, which was run by Madras Presidency, Malabar, because rest of the Kerala, the region of Kerala, were princely states. So his superior, his senior at the academy or teacher said, you have to learn Malayalam. So he wrote to his senior saying that, look, I mean, this is quite not reasonable, and it's a common sense because it's my mother tongue. And his senior ICS officer wrote back to him, by the virtue of his position, the gentleman is barred from exercising common sense. So you can see the joke, deprecating humor about the civil servants. That civil servants are not supposed to have common sense. And you're asking a native speaker of Malayalam to learn Malayalam because he has been posted there. So this, and Max Muller taught many of these graduates. You know, Max Muller cut his teeth there. He never came to India, but he was a teacher of Indian classical languages to the ICS. And they had to learn attending court cases, writing reports. And these were all the magistrate courts in and around, in and around the city of London. You know, it's a small little area. And this province, which they were allocated, and even today, until recently, there was this big debate, which is a good cadre. And I have always been very intrigued why people found the Northwest Frontier province in Punjab as the most favored destination. It's very interesting. They found these two provinces the most favored, and it depended on your rank. So if you had a higher rank, you could pick and choose your posting, your province. And the least popular were Madras and Bombay. Of course, it changed later on in case of Bombay because they had this fantastic architecture, a lot of trade, a lot of money. But again, you know, there was a certain taint of, you know, being in the trading port. Again, that apathy towards trade was very visible. And Madras presidency was called the benighted presidency because many of the top ranking candidates wouldn't like to go and spend time. Bengal was quite sought after because it was the capital, but it was also very dangerous increasingly because of the freedom movement and the revolutionary struggle, and so the security became an issue. So it's a very interesting thing. And until recently, also you had this favorite cadre among the Indian administrative service officers. And in the ICS, basically, you went out to manage a district. If you were to cast a picture, if you were to draw a picture, it was a classic scholar in Greek, Latin, and all that, poetry, sporty gentleman who loved the outdoors. Okay. Can you see the slide, Chandan? Queen Victoria's custodian, or it's all gone? Chandan?
The next one, Praveen. Okay, perfect. That's the slide. Kaustav, you're seeing the slide now.
Okay, good. Now, something very interesting happens in 1858. The Government of India Act, which is right after the British mutiny, the Sepoy mutiny, the first war of independence, and the British power over India is transferred from East India Company to the Crown. And this act basically provided that India is going to be governed directly and in the name of Crown. And there are very few Crown colonies, if one looks back in history, and India was one of them. And they had a separate Secretary of State for India, you can say a portfolio, a cabinet portfolio, would have been a minister rank of a cabinet and would preside over the India office in London, and was assisted by a Council of India. And they sent a viceroy, who was until then called Governor General, who would be the head of government of India and was a personal representative of the monarch of Great Britain. And the most colorful and viceroy we can think of is Lord Mountbatten, who also happened to be the last viceroy of British India. And he was most of them were he, unfortunately. So when I use the word he, it looks very anachronistic, but the demographics started changing only after independence, when you had lots of women officers joining the IAS, IFS, IPS, most of the services. And the representation has only been increasing, thankfully, over the decades and years. And I have had the good fortune during my research to interview several very smart women officers. And yeah, I mean, it's only getting better for many of them. And this viceroy was assisted by this executive council, and which started including Indian members, Then they had the Legislative Council in 1862. These were all like what you call the experiments of pastoral democracy, this small little experiments of giving a taste to the Indians about self-government. You can see how, this kind of British model of, political emancipation in small doses. And most importantly, the ICS officers were now officials of the British Crown and appointed by Her Majesty the Queen Victoria. Now you look here, there was a civil service created by a global corporation, East India Company, a multinational, which then became part of the imperial state. And it's very interesting if someone wants to pick that up from a political science perspective, how global corporation, officials moved into a state, but an imperial state. And, is there any causality, But also the 1853 Act did something remarkable. It opened the ICS to all natural-born subjects of the crown. Till then, you hardly found Indians in the ICS, the upper echelons. And who was the first Indian? This was Satyendranath Tagore, the eldest brother of India's Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore. And he joined the Bombay presidency. In fact, his posting was in Gujarat, I think somewhere in Surat. And Rabindranath Tagore, while visiting him, wrote the famous novel Khudito Pashan, if you Hungry Stone. So that's when Rabindranath Tagore was visiting his brother in his bungalow, district collector's bungalow, and he wrote that novel. So it took about good 10 years after the 1853 Act for the first Indian to join. Of course, as you can imagine, there would be lots of prejudice, racism, and resistance. And the British counterparts, sneered at them as being bookish, less sporting, and that usual, the British racist sneer, which was there, the colonial imperial sneer of masculinity, missing in the brown-skinned Indian and things like that. And the Indians, of course, made very strenuous efforts to fit in, to assimilate. And that's why you have this term coined brown sahabs, which is looking brown outside but white inside. And many of them, there are lots of caricatures of this early generation of ICS officers to adopt an European mode of life. And they even started describing their trip to Britain as going home on a furlough, or home country, or home services, way back home. So they thought they were being British. And what is very interesting, that there were only 5 or 6 Indians who qualified in that period. And most of them were from Bengal.
Kaustav, sorry to interrupt your truly gripping presentation. Can you move to the next slide? You may have to take the PPT off, go to the correct slide, and then bring it back on. I don't see any other way of doing this.
So what should I do now?
Stop screen share and reshare it with the right slide selected.
Oh, okay. So every time okay.
Yeah, I don't see
I go out and come back. Okay.
Yes. Sorry, Kaustav.
No worries. This is like a district, doing helibaries or something. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Now, when I move to the next slide, I'll go out and then,
Please.
reconnect
Please.
again.
Thank you. Yeah.
ICS also became an apex of aspiration for educated Indians. I think this is very important for your students to know that when I went through the list of aspirants of ICS, because I also used a lot of literary works as my reference, novels, memoirs, biographies, travelogues. There's hardly any, freedom fighter educated in Britain. I'm not talking of the indigenous ones, whose parents or whose father didn't aspire the son to be an ICS officer. So Pandit Nehru was sent to Britain to join the ICS. Same with Jyoti Basu, by the way. And you had the two exceptional cases of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, who joined and left the ICS and became a freedom fighter. And you had Aurobindo, who, of course, again became a revolutionary, but he refused to take the horse riding test. So he said, no, this is all rubbish. So there's a very interesting text, is a recollection why he thought the physical test was hogwash and nonsense. So there were two cases, and Surendranath Banerjee, the first Congress president, was disqualified from the ICS, and he formed the Indian National Congress. So I think for a sociologist, it can be very interesting that how the ICS also provides a window into the formation of what you would call the nationalist Indian bourgeois elite. So it also triggered a very similar defeudalization process, and people who dreamt of a modern, democratic, liberal India. So this is very important, that ICS was a very, very powerful and very, how can I say, appealing career, for a lot of families. Perhaps it's much more than a Harvard MBA today. And also the aristocracy, I meant, maybe I don't know how far it's relevant in other parts of India, but definitely in UP and Bengal and Assam, you had the landed gentry also sending its children to study ICS, to qualify for the ICS. Okay. Now, next slide, I'll go out and okay. Can you see this nationalist ICS, Chandan? Chandan?
Yes. Yes.
You can see nationalist ICS. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Now, I would like to draw Chandan in here. Chandan, I thought I left it in my thesis as an area for potential research, which you have to write in every PhD, like which are the areas for potential future research. There was this breed of nationalist ICS, Indian ICS officers, who identified with the aspirations of freedom from the British rule. And yet they were serving the British masters. Of course, you had the extreme case of Netaji Bose and Sri Aurobindo, but you had also a lot of other cases, and many of these ICS, nationalist ICS, moved over to the judiciary, because if they were in direct administration, they would have been responsible for arresting the Indian freedom fighters. People like Gandhiji were arrested, thrown behind the bar, and many of them felt uneasy doing that. And we have a quote here: "Patriotism is not the monopoly of non-officials," by C.D. Deshmukh, the first Indian governor of Reserve Bank of India, ICS officer. And I think this requires a very interesting research, but particularly if one also explores the folklore. in families, if you talk to the children or the grandchildren of these ICS officers, because many of these sympathies which they expressed were surreptitious. It was not overt. It was not blatant, but their support was surreptitious, was covert, and it made a lot of difference to the lives of many of them. So there was a certain liberal nationalist ICS, and you have Mr. A.S. Panchapakesha Iyer, who specifically opted for the judiciary because he felt he can't keep on arresting these freedom fighters and be heavy-handed. And I spoke to his son, who was the former foreign secretary, the late A.P. Venkateshwaran, and he did talk about his father's deep sympathies, and he gave me a few books written about that. And there are, of course, very funny anecdote of his father talking to an English officer in a club and saying, how many children you have? He said, 5 more the merrier, so he can throw the British. And then the British said, I thought, hey, do you say Jai Hind every time you're giving birth to a child? So then you have G.D. Khoshla, who kept a photo of Gandhiji in his drawing room. And there's this very interesting case of Mr. Pillai, who struck and beat up an arrogant white police officer, European, for blowing smoke into the face of an Indian lady. And Mr. H.V.R. Iyengar, of course, he played a very key role because Bombay government was, incidentally, one of the very tough and very brutal, scathing government when it came to dealing with freedom fighters. And Ashok Mitra's indictment of the British government and its apathy and the Royal Commission it's there in EPW. It's a very interesting read. So Chandan, I think this can be someone can pick this up and at least for paper, if not a PhD, the nationalist ICS,
Yes, and in the post-independence times, what does ideology do after independence in terms of affiliations? These tacit, perhaps, with party formations outside and post-retirement gigs, and and being handpicked by governments to head departments while they're in power, etc. I mean, this is a complete, disregard for any semblance of official neutrality, really. Anyway, Kaustav, please carry on. I think
in post-independence, I must say, during the student rebellion, some of it is being very extreme. In Bengal, the leftist movement, the radical leftist movement, many IS officers and IPS officers didn't take the hardline official line. They didn't adopt that. Many of them, like one of them told me, I was arresting these young students and keeping them under my tutelage because they wouldn't be beaten to death by the policemen on the road. So he did have a lot of liberal, and Karnataka was very famous for it. I mean, we had people like Mr. Chiranjeev Singh, incredible sympathy for the broader liberal intelligentsia, liberal activists. They could not always do it openly, but I've met IS officers in Karnataka who openly express sympathies and and identified. I mean, if you see, again, I go back to Mr. Chiranjeev Singh, who has been, by the way, a very big inspiration. I want to take this opportunity to mention his name behind this research. He was my first port of call. And if you ever want to see a model IS officer of not just honesty and efficiency, but also decency, of love of the people, I would say that was Mr. Chiranjeev Singh, So, and there were a lot of other people as well. I remember in the IPS who are quite, liberal and who don't take the official line. So, administrative service in India, we were quite fortunate that they were not what you see in Myanmar, ready to go and crack. So, Chandan, I think that culture also needs recording because.
Kaustav, I didn't mean things were like they are now the whole time. There have been shifts clearly, but even being liberal is a virtue only under a certain climate.
Yes.
Chiranjeev Singh could admire, it could earn the sort of praise of politicians and the public at large because of a certain value system that was in place, which is
Yes.
increasingly endangered, I would think. But please go on, Kaustav.
Yeah, can I also give a small anecdote? You see, liberal in a different sense. Like there was a journalist called P.K. Srinivasan, and he wasn't conformist. I mean, I met him at Koshi's. I mean, conformists don't. He never used to go to Koshi's those days. We didn't knew what right wing was.
Yeah.
So, and P.K. Srinivasan was known for his heavy drinking, and he became press secretary to Devraj Rs. And, Chiranjeev Singh was responsible. I think Bulganin or someone was visiting. And PK fell asleep in one of the dignitaries' chair. He used to go to the press club. Very brilliant mind, wrote well. And Chiranjeev Singh quietly escorted, he got him lifted and escorted into the room and all, And, that willingness to go out and sit. I mean, even Mr. Abhijit Sengupta, I have to name these people as appreciation today, I never knew he was a top IS officer. He used to come to poetry reading with us, He used to let his hair down. Now, this culture increasingly is disappearing under the assault of a very different thing of being efficient, All this is seen as being inefficient, of being, this competition.
Kaustav, I will need to interrupt to remind us that we are 1 hour into the session. We only have half an hour left. I know there have been interruptions. If you can quickly, try to cover the other essentials you needed to convey, and then we can have a Q&A.
Sure.
Afterward. Sorry about that.
No problem. These were just two powerful things given the way the world might be going in future. So anyway, I don't have many slides left. Now, district. You see, I can call it Indian district services. One of the big findings from my research, where I studied informal networks of learning and innovation, was that the Indian civil services or the IAS operates in the most cogent, coherent, cohesive form, like as with a strong camaraderie as a group at the district level. The district commissioner calls them over for a drink in the evening. They have candid conversations. They are willing to help each other. The term scaffolding, which is used by Vygorovsky, a Russian psychologist, where you allow someone to make a mistake, but you're always there if they fall down, defend them. So district was a very powerful, entity, a powerful aspect of the Indian civil service. And you have the quote of Lord Curzon. And also there was another ICS officer who said, he who can speedily, satisfactorily administer justice, dispense justice on land cases will rule India. And later on, the land disputes today make or break government. So, this district administration should never be neglected, how pivotal it was. And the district collector was the head of the district. Again, we see a certain recreation of the local administration of Britain, except that this was not, this was what you'd call a natural aristocracy, not a hereditary. So the district collector to pass exams and qualify himself to be there, rather than being born into the manorial family, the lord of the manor. And they also had the judicial power, which I think today is changing a lot, but what is called the districts and session judge. But very few of them made it to the High Court. And of course, they were also responsible for the revenue, which has been discontinued in modern India, right, Chandan? You don't collect revenue on agriculture anymore. Agriculture is not taxed directly, right? They have a complicated system of taxation of agriculture. Am I right? Hello? Oh, I lost him. Hello? What's happening? Okay. And the activities which tested the mettle of the ICS district collector were handling of natural calamities and containing communal violence. Communal violence between different groups, ethnic groups, between communities, all sorts of things, or disputes about burial grounds, land disputes. So these things are constantly happening. Okay, and as you can see that a very big mandate, a very big evaluation of the district collector, a big performance was if he or she could expect it to take charge and respond effectively. Chandan?
Yes.
Okay. I said, I just wanted a clarification. They don't collect taxes on agriculture anymore, right? In India, there's a very complex system. There's no direct taxation of agriculture like revenues. Am I right there?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. There's no income tax on them. Yes.
Yeah. So like the old revenue collection is gone. There's a more complicated, like a personal tax. If it's above something. I mean, I tried looking it up, but it's a whole different procedure for thing. So can you see the slides of 1, 2, 3, 4? I mean, the responsible district collector.
Yes.
Hello?
Okay. Yes, we can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't have to repeat all of them because I've already discussed, but it's very important that the administration was just not focused only on maintaining the flow of revenue, but also ensuring some amount of social welfare. They were also responsible for managing social welfare programs. So they looked after forests, roads, schools, hospitals. You have many villages in parts of India which are run by ICS officers like Tamil Nadu, Madras, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and West Bengal, where you would have a school named after an old ICS officer who set it up. And sometimes they collected money very ingeniously through different programs, relief work during natural calamities. And number 4 is very interesting, given the times we live in. I mean, persuading people to accept vaccination. So you see, some things never change. I mean, we are talking about 19th century Indian civil service, and I'm sure number 4 is causing a lot of sleepless nights and headache for many, many IS officers. And number 5 is also interesting if you remember Swachh Bharat campaigns, and of course you have film actors and actresses in the role getting into the act. But you see how some of these things are still very important. But what this district was so fascinating for, you find this leitmotif in British scholarly literature, is some of these districts were larger than entire parts of Britain, with population close to 1 million. So that really was a very, how can I say, mesmerizing thing, literally, that a young 24, 25-year-old kid could go and take charge of a district. And most of the people I interviewed took charge of district before they turned 30. So 27, 28, 29, And if you have students who are of that age, I think it would be interesting for them to reflect, going and taking charge of a district. So can you see the next one, paternalistic tradition? Is it working?
Yeah, we see it now. Yes, we see it now.
Okay, good. This is probably the last slide, I think, or one more. So there were also this custodianship, which I talked about. Now I'll just connect it to my notion of elites. I think elites are, interpreted in different ways, perceived in different ways. The very basic definition of elite is someone who's very powerful or rich. So if you're a billionaire, you're by definition, you're qualified to be an elite, because there are very few people who have $1 billion in any society of the world. And if you are a prime minister, even if it's of Iceland, you're an elite because you have a certain responsibility, you have certain power, you are addressing the parliament. And the second form of elites, which is discussed by Pierre Bourdieu, is your habitus, your cultural taste, whether you watch football or you play golf or you watch cricket, and whether you watch an opera, Verdi, or you listen to rock and roll, or watch Phantom of the Night, whatever that Phantom of the Opera. But the third part, which I think what my research humble contribution was, that what about the notion of custodianship, custodian of the people? And in many Southeast Asian countries, the monarchy plays that role when they have instability. So when there's a fall in the government, the monarch calls all the warring parties and negotiates with them to form a government. So my notion of elite is, if you do not have this custodianship of the people or a custodianship of the society, you are more a privileged elite, but not an elite in the truest sense of the term. That's what I demonstrated, and that's what I established. And as you can see, I mean, this line may be a very simple extract from a district diary, but do think about it. Who would attend to citizens who came to meet, listen to their grievances in the form of petitions. And that sort of made them the potent symbol of the ruler, that you can impact and influence lives. Chandan, would you like to give a feedback on this, or you want me to finish it off then? Chandan, can you see the slide?
I can see the slide, Kaustav, but please finish the presentation. We will have very little time for the Q&A otherwise. Please finish.
Yeah. This is also another thing that they were called griffins.
Yes.
The IS officers who came, and the training was very much practical, It was not so much of classroom. It was very informal. It was learning by observing and learning by doing. And there was a very special scheme of mentoring where you would end up living in the same house or the residence with the collector. They would bring you under their tutelage, and most of the time the collector wouldn't have been married or had a family because they would have been quite young. So it was a very interesting camaraderie which built around that. So practical learning by observation, and then they're sent out to do things. And if they made mistakes, you learn from mistakes. And these district tours are very important. I mean, your promotion, your confirmation you joined as the subdivisional officer or an assistant magistrate, and then assistant district magistrate, and then you qualified as a additional district magistrate, and then you become a district magistrate. So all these reports are very, very important, and you really got to see, if you're an urban kid from Bangalore who have never been outside and you're posted in a tribal area or in a deep rural area, this was a very interesting, eye-opening exercise for many of them. And the scaffolding is a theory which I brought in from business management research, which is about, you allow someone to do, but you nevertheless, it's like a scaffold when you do construction. So you don't allow them to sort of fall down. So, and this is very interesting. Of a particular generation of IS officers whom I interviewed, there was a real glory and glamour of the district administration. They thought the secretariat was all these pen pushers and the babus and the clerks, and full of as they call hedged and compromised and wrapped up their meaning in provisos. So they were just manipulators. So there was a certain glory and glamour for being this very person out there who operates with a gutsy style of being very visceral, of facing the dust and the wind of the district, rather than sitting in the cushy secretariat. And as you can see, none other than Rudyard Kipling called them all head, no physique, and 100 theories. Sorry, I'm making an academic presentation and Chandan is here. I hope this is not too offensive, but this is all head, no physique, and 100 theories. But this is a very practical world, and they were celebrated, although they had, very fine degrees. And my presentation is pretty much over, but I've brought these three, little slides to demonstrate that if you look at a lot of the ICS officers who qualified Indians from early 20th century, practically none of them attended what you'd call an English school or an Anglican school. You'd not find a St. Joseph's, Bishop Cotton's, or anything like that, or St. Xavier's. I mean, they were all government high schools. So this also talks about that meritocratic institution, what existed. I mean, look at that, Chittagong Collegiate School. So
Kaustav, we're not able to see that chart, but we'll just take you at we'll just listen to the facts being read out by you.
You can take a printout and give it to them.
Yes.
But I wonder, even we can, if the schools are today good enough to churn out even state civil servant, because many of them, are complaints teachers don't attend. But look at this. Mr. Sapru, A.N. Sapru, studied in Kaustav Pathshala in Allahabad. You had Mr. Ramnath Sivaram, K. Sivaram from higher grade English school in Qatar. So you see the government schooling system.
Yes, I think Kaustav's camera seems to have turned off, or the Wi-Fi problem at his end. This is give him a minute to restore it. Apologies again for the very many technical difficulties we've had to endure this afternoon. It's never happened before. Let me quickly call him to check what's happening at his end. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Please continue, Kaustav. We lost you for a bit.
I'm done, actually.
Okay. So we'll have questions for you from the audience.
Is it possible I can see the person asking the question, or it's not?
No, that option somehow it doesn't exist. You can see the question in front of you on the screen, Kaustav. This is about the new proposal of the central government.
How do you see the proposal of the central government to introduce lateral entry into the civil services in the light of your comment regarding the state and the corporates? Well, first of all, my comment about the state and the corporates was related to the East India Company, which was a global multinational and how it influenced the British state, or if it did influence the British state, and how the civil service, which was created by them, was transferred to the British state, which was an imperial state. I think it's a, a very, very different nature of observation than the causality between state and corporate. That's a whole different topic. I'm happy to discuss, but that's something which I have to prepare. But the lateral entry was bound to come. I mean, the civil service has changed in its character. I think it's looking more and more for people who are specialized, people who are experts. So I don't know if the corporates and government have that sort of Berlin Wall-like separation, which was there in the commanding heights of the state. So yeah, but that state and corporate is very different. It's more of an imperial state of Britain, because British state was not imperial. Queen Victoria's state is not same as any state. It was a state which was governing 30% of the Earth's surface and quarter of the Earth's population. And East India Company was a global corporation. So I'm just wondering how, what sort of interface happened. And Chandan, would you like to add something?
Yes, Kaustav, I had a question. You talked to us about how it was English colonialism or British colonialism that sort of assembled this classical past, where the Greek and Roman civilizations were clubbed as part of one mythic origin point. I was wondering about the place of the Mughal Empire in this imagination, because so much of the administrative lexicon derives from that the Persian words continue to exist. And we know that the taxation system policies, etc., that the British initially put in place were rested heavily on pre-existing practices. So I was wondering if you can comment on how they, what are the Mughals doing in the imagination of the early civil servants, at least, before the memories fade.
The ones I interviewed, practically none of them referred to the Mughal empire, except for using words like Ji Huzur and Badshah and Khazana.
I meant among the early set of civil servants or whom you studied, who the Hailbury College people who come here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It didn't strike the Mughal fever, if you want to say. It came much later. The White Mughal of Dalrymple is a very perfect example. It came, I think, as look, when Hailbury was started, Britain wasn't an imperial entity. I'm making a very broad statement, but I'm always very curious why the literature I read never talked about British Empire across the other side of Atlantic. That's something, they were already an empire, with America was their colony, but somehow the imperial literature which I came across always referred in this India as the sort of jewel in the crown. I have not come across, maybe the people can correct me there, but I think the imperial consciousness as far as India is concerned starts happening end of 19th century. And then you have this white Mughal syndrome. Curzon talks about it. You look at Victoria Memorial. People don't realize if you walk inside Victoria Memorial, you don't find Thomas Gainsborough, please, or John Turner. You find lots of Mughal, architecture, painting, motifs. Yeah, that also played a certain imagination after a certain point. And, this huge debates which is to happen, that Queen Victoria is too fond of this feudal class of Indians, same with Curzon. So, and you can't talk about it because today when you talk about the empire, it's the version which has been handed down by the rising bourgeoisie and its disgruntled, experience. But you go to Chelsea Library or any British library, and you ask for a book on like fishing fleet, and it is going to be booked. So people still are very romantic about that royalty, and if you read Fishing Fleet, they talk about. So that is one part which I guess no one bothers to talk about or explore. But yes, but more than not only Mughal, Chandan, I think the royal, Travancore, Mysore, the darbar, that also got assimilated into that Greco-Roman thing, not just Mughal. I mean, look at the Dashera and the accounts by British officers, and there was a certain charm of this simple, chaste Maharaja dispensing justice, rather than the pen-pushing lawyers and babus. I mean, you look at the disparaging remarks, but historians like you need to pick that up. I mean,
Yes. Yes. Kaustav, we have two more questions from the audience.
Do you see a shift from the more masculine, outdoor, yet paternalistic career of an ICS in 19th century to one loaded with paperwork and office-based dispensation of justice and order by the time they left? If yes, what does this tell about the shift in the imperial priorities? No, I'm afraid not. I interviewed 60s batch lady officers, since someone has used the word masculine, and boy, oh boy, they had to go out in the floods. I mean, this lady, I can't name because these are all confidential interviews. There was a possibility of a huge outbreak of a riot during a particular festival between two communities, and one of the communities was standing on the rooftop with hot tar, and she went out disguised as an ordinary citizen, picking up gossip from the crowd and then working out how to contain the violence, or for example, in some of these rivers during summer which dries up, you have the silt, how to move some of the very violent groups. I'm afraid the masculine outdoor has evolved into feminine outdoor, and paternalistic is maternalistic. I mean, no, those challenges, lathi charges.
Kaustav, I think the question was trying to ask if within the span of the British colonial rule, did we see a shift in the image of the bureaucrat from that being this cultured, Oxbridge type on a horse, etc., to someone who is just a file pusher?
No, not at the district level. This is very important, because this question is precisely what, if I may say, it's a very, it touches a very raw nerve in me, because the illiteracy, middle class Indian urban perception is license permit, is about giving, like one IS officer said, I've never signed a license permit in my life. Most IS officers don't give out licenses. But you talk to the Chief Secretary of Karnataka at the end of a flood, the amount of 1 million checks had to be dispensed, or the vaccination program. So yes, it does evoke some amount of irritation in me, because this is an image which is of the bureaucracy in state secretariat and all. But a large part of the IS in the district still faces this problem. And I did this very interesting exercise of interviewing a 47 cadre, 50 cadre, 2004 cadre, 2009 cadre. Karnataka, Karnataka was another state, digital, cyber, but there are still custodial deaths in the district. There are still fights over cattle theft. It doesn't mean that this is backward or anything, but it's just a way of life, man. I mean, when you have floods, look at the vaccination, look at this pandemic. I mean, go and talk to the police officer. One of my IPS friends was telling me, I don't know if I could have contracted COVID when I'm, controlling this protest and I have to shove these people into the van. But bureaucracy for us, this paperwork is something which was created to knock the state in much later, and the Indian urban middle class only saw bureaucracy through that lens, and that's why I was badly hectored. So that's far from the truth. The outdoor is still very much there. They might be Oxbridge. Yes, there is that part of them as well. Absolutely. It's just, as I think one of the Jowett or I don't know who said, earlier there were gentlemen from Haileybury's drinking claret. Now they're Oxbridge scholar gentlemen. Now what they drank, I don't know. I mean, that's different. But I don't think the outdoor challenges came down or still has come down at all. Imagine the migration which happened in last year. I mean, please, Yes, Chandan, would you like to add something?
No, there's another question which should appear on the screen in a minute.
Yeah, there were many non-lawyers who were appointed as judges through the ICS by the British. Why did the Indian government after independence stopped appointing judges through IS? I don't know. I have absolutely no clue. Chandan, would you like to take that?
No. I don't know how
Yeah.
to. I don't know why it stopped. There's the same question appearing on your screen now, Kaustav, belatedly.
I have absolutely no clue. I can't even take a guess at it because.
Yes. Kaustav, I had a question about if you were to step back and notice, major shifts in official culture, the time when which they were handpicked by the directors of the company, the early phase, and then the competitive exam, and then you have a phase where, Indians are eligible to do this, and do you see shifts in how the civil service, culture manifests? Because you did talk about, what was seen as a necessity, necessary virtues in a civil servant. Did that understanding change by the practitioners, given how their social backgrounds varied so much?
Yes.
And also, of course, the question about when Indians come in, was it completely open? Was it possible that everyone selected that year could have been an Indian? Or was there a way in which the numbers were managed? And again, the inevitable question: how did despite the racism, etc., how did they, outside of managing the nationalism, which competed with the loyalties, etc., but in terms of understanding, when you have an Indian who's grown up here, who can understand the situation better outside of the rules that they've picked up, and then you have someone from abroad, in managing the kinds of crises you alerted to just now, cattle theft or property disputes, or the extra social knowledge you bring to a situation. What did that do in terms of how administration was done?
Well, one of the most unfortunate part of my PhD is I couldn't interview an ICS officer, a living, breathing ICS officer. Most of them are dead, or they were in a shape not able to communicate. I was told they are British ICS, they were British ICS officers who were alive. I could have got the address from British Library, but somehow, because I was studying the IAS and moving into the ICS, it's not a historical work. It's very important your students and the questioners realize it's not a historical work. It is meant to be bringing business theories, sense into a public administration setting. So I don't know how the British ICS officers reacted, but the Indian ICS officers, first of all, the composition started changing for different factors. One, the exam started getting held in India from 1922. Which was a big demand of Indian National Congress. And you can study the rise of the Indian history through the lens of ICS. Every Congress session, we need seats in the ICS. And at the same time, they would go out and knock it as imperial service. So it is a very funny relationship they had. And 1922 onwards, you could write the exam totally out of India. You don't have to go abroad. So that opened up the opportunities. And secondly, fewer Britishers got interested in joining ICS. Halle Berry's period was a very different period. Then the employment opportunities grew within Britain. The expansion of the British academic intellectual sector, not so much the corporation, but the academic intellectual sector expanded. So there were fewer, and of course, First World War, knocked off a lot of young men. So there were not many young men who were willing to come. There was a decline, very tragic population. And so the Indians, if there's been a shift, you see, I am very worried, my professors in Britain, that a lot of it was heavy romanticizing the Halle Berrys, going on a shoot and a stick sticking and all that. Most of them would have written about it and, with a bravado, but was life really that fancy? It was, yes, claret drinking. A lot of it was, we have to understand, this is an imperial game, an imperial exercise. So there's a lot of hype. But, the district challenge, I'm afraid my data never showed any relief for the poor district collectors or the ladies. I mean, I wish there was an IAS officer. I mean, I'm more than happy to do another one with one Karnataka and one Bengal cadre. I think that will be much more, doing justice to the question. But no, I think there's newer challenges came. For example, dealing with the freedom fighters, dealing with radical revolutions, dealing with communal problem in India, So the Indian ICS were faced with many more challenges as it progressed. In the early years, if you see old Bengali movies, I mean, that's the only way. It was a bit like White Mughal or that Anthony Firingi, lots of, partying, but the structures were not in place. I think after mutiny, I don't think the Habitus spirit could have carried on. Things were very complicated. You could have, I mean, if you look at the killing spree which happened, I don't think they would have, and the racist views got hardened after the mutiny.
Yes.
It's very funny. They allow the Indians, but then again, the security became much more an important priority. And they were not allowed to marry Indian women, these British officers. So it's Habitus is Habitus. I speak about it, but I wouldn't like to ascribe too much importance. I know it's very romantic. I'm sure many of your students would love to. I mean, I don't know if do you get a lot of claret in Azim Premji University?
No, officially not allowed, like most universities. Yeah.
I can see the students getting excited, but I'm afraid to disappoint them. That's the world which I couldn't even come on reading from early 20th century. It was a very tough business. I mean, dealing with Aurobindo and his brothers, bombing every day, Stanley Jackson getting shot. I mean, it was not party at all, so. But the physical challenge was very much there, the Oxford Scholar and all this there. But, this managing, you see this, I think Bhaskar Ghosh talks about it. One of the biggest contribution of Indian administrative service is managing the social fault line. And this, that if you look at the history of riots in India, at least in Bengal, most of the riots happen in urban areas more than the rural areas. Because in rural areas, the DC is in touch and it can swing into action. And for some strange reason, the politicians don't, until recently, couldn't intervene at the district level. So, these challenges. I mean, just imagine the elections in Bengal now, which are going to start. Imagine the poor DC. I mean, how is it any different than the one we were? The outdoors is very much there. He may not have drank claret and played cricket, but the physical stamina. And in COVID, I don't know any IS, IPS who hasn't been struck down with COVID in Bengal, So, those challenges remain very much so, So this managing of social fault line, IS did a remarkable job, and political neutrality. In fact, one of the big criticism of this communal violence is not so much the ideal, but the IS officer should be neutral. And, you talk to people in Karnataka, Kader also, I'm bringing Karnataka because Bengal is a very vulnerable case, who said that we had to open fire. We had no choice when, things got out of hand, when things turned turbulent. So I hope, that answers your question. And, but there was definitely a shift, the British ICS, that racism, that understanding of, a very patronizing condescension was very much there. And, Justice Broome is an exception, who settled in Bangalore. He was the last British ICS. And I used to know his son-in-law who passed away 2020 early. I used to live here. He was 80 years old. And he, sort of shared a lot of the anecdotes. But he also ended up learning a lot of local languages. He got himself assimilated. There's a certain British gentlemanly ethos, like even if they're condescending or patronizing, but a certain sense of responsibility, a certain sense of nuanced, expression of the superiority. It wasn't a very blatant kind of thing. I mean, at least going by the experience. I have not been in that environment and experienced it. The Britain I experienced was a dynamic city of London. The more the money, the more merrier kind of situation. So I hope that answers your question. So.
Yeah, Kaustav, there's one, I think we have another question.
I'm sure you can give some extra time for a glass of claret sometime. What is Victorian Britain has many young men being given huge responsibilities, prizes. Yeah. And Victorian Britain is a very interesting, Anne Wilson's work. So, but I would like to take this opportunity to reach out to your students in the audience. I feel the ICS should be studied from the Indian angle. From 1863 or 73, when Rabindranath Tagore's eldest brother came, it changed the character. It had and you look at the most of the stalwart ICS officers were Indians. You have to understand. So most of the most brilliant, well-performing ICS officers, and I have made a list, just before the thing. Like if you look at Sukumar Sen, who Ram Bua talks about, how he was the first election commissioner who sort of introduced democracy. Sir B.N. Rao, who was part of the Constituent Assembly, who played a key role in drafting of the Constitution. R.A. Gopalswamy, first census commissioner. So although it was a British civil service brought to India, but it took a very, very different character with the Indians joining in. And I think at some point we have to really start acknowledging that there can be imperial institutions, but Indians made the best use out of it. I think this is very, very, as I said, that nationalist ICS question I couldn't study, and I regretted that, in a PhD, you have to, you have time limits, you have resource limits, because that would require, and it was very, very interesting, So, Sir Gurunath Bewar, who was the chairman of Air India, I can't rattle off so many names of British ICS who have done so many remarkable work. British ICS, many of them were what you'd call in colloquial Bangalore language time pass,
Kaustav, the inevitable question would be, that of course, at that point in time, given the sociological realities of accessing the public education system that the British had inaugurated here, most of the Indians who got into the civil service were also upper castes, even though they're from different parts of the country. How do you view that variable in understanding the evolution of ICS?
Yes,
in what ways do you think it mattered?
Yes, absolutely. Before I come to caste, I would like to say what was very striking for me, not a single woman.
Yes.
It's men, and, as a 21st century social science, practitioner, whatever you want to call it, amateur scholar, it makes me so, queasy to keep on writing men, because, when you usually do matriarchy or patriarchy. So yes, that bias was very much there. And the caste was, even if there were people from other castes who are not belonging to the privileged section of society, they were not recognized. They were not, there was a lot of struggle. And I did interview what you would call backward caste officers, and we're more than willing and happy to talk off record. And in recognition of that, the IS at the very onset in independent India made the provision for reservation of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, which was 15% for scheduled caste, 7.5% for scheduled tribe. So that whole reservation affirmative action was a very clear statement that this was not acceptable. Mm-hmm. And then VP Singh's landmark ruling in 1990, the Mandal Commission, which the kind of uproar it created in many parts of India, was also very, very important. And I heard an anecdote from someone who went to meet VP Singh. He said, "Why did you do this?" And he said, "Look at the telephone directory and you see the caste bias." But also, I think a very important thing we have to acknowledge today, the urban, educated, irrespective of caste, if I may just talk about the class part here, are not going to join civil service. How much reproduction has taken place? Even in the Indian ICS, there are very few who went and joined back ICS. Most of them went abroad. Most of them are in corporate. So we needed talent pool from the rural areas, from tribal areas, semi-urban areas. And even if we didn't have the affirmative action program, but just by natural law of demand and supply, we would have seen more and more people from that sort of, let's say, closer to the soil background joining the civil services. So I think sometimes when we create this space and platform, we don't realize we are just facilitating an inevitable process, inexorable march, what I would say. And you see, you talk to me. Yes, one big difference is, in fact, this was a joke made by a British friend of mine who was not an academic, but a motorcycle enthusiast. He said, when I read the earlier generation, it's a load of, big talk, serving the nation and all that. That's his opinion, not mine. He said, look at the newer generation. They're more, honest. They said that this DC was the most powerful man in my district. Or I wanted to, be the most powerful person, something like that. It's more explicit, So as the social strata changed, you found this idea of serving the nation and the grandeur, which, many would say was a smokescreen, many would say was real, but it changed. And I can only applaud it because life is changing, reality is changing, So you see today the recruits of current IAS. But what's very funny is, just as the Heliberries snickered at the competition wallas, every reform in IAS, the preceding generation said, oh, we are going to have the decline. But I don't think, any of this. So, how do we explain this? The Heliberries thought, oh my God, these guys are not, so this is very interesting for me about another thing about ICS. It's been reforming, and at every stage of reform, it was subject to criticism by the established, members, saying this is going to lead to a complete collapse or a decline. But, the march carries on,
Thank you, Kaustav. Thank you for leading us through this really exciting, range of issues. The historical background is, definitely, something that many of us, even the existing treatments of civil services tend to look at it as an administrative structure from the public administration point of view, and completely, indifferent to the cultural coordinates, which, actually make it, a different object of study altogether. Kaustav, thank you again, and apologies again for the many avoidable interruptions we had to encounter. Thanks for the patience, and thank you again for the lovely talk, and we'll keep talking. And thank you to the audience, and apologies to the audience too for the interruptions we have had to see.
Well,
but yes,
I would just like to make.
Yes,
yeah,
please.
I'd just like to make first of all, thank you very much, Chandan, for making my Friday afternoon so lively. And I think both of us should close it with a glass of claret, but in another time, another day, we would have sat across the table. Well, we can't go on a shooter, but at least a claret would have done, because we also enjoy that same camaraderie. But I must say that I didn't come so much prepared. I'm more than to talk about Heliberries, the British period, Heliberries to the Victorian company. So I couldn't do justice to some of the questions, but I would like to disappoint the students of Azim Premji University that there are no Heliberries around the world. I have been to some of the most pristine institutions. It's all very practical, pragmatic. So the best party you can get is what you're getting in Bangalore, and be happy with it. Unfortunately, there is no company director who's going to nominate you. And so I could see that romance coming out, and I'm very glad that, people, my biggest satisfaction today is people found a part of my presentation to be quite charming, and and there's some excitement about this outdoor world, but it's all gone. Even in Britain, we are living in a very different world. But most of my focus was the Indianization of the ICS and how it impacted. And there are a lot of trailing threads, as my supervisor, trailing wires. I would be more than happy if there's an open invitation to any of your students who'd like to study nationalist ICS. I would be very happy to see the social, what you talked about, the class caste combination. I'm from Bengal, so the word class comes at the forefront. That, the same class or caste which demanded freedom, send the children to ICS, that bourgeois formation of India. And I don't know, Chandan, would you agree that a lot of the caste problems would have appeared very differently had India remained in the feudal order and not the bourgeoisification created some distortions in the caste power structures or the caste equations?
It's a huge question. It's a big question. Thinking about it counterfactually will need a lot of time.
True, but just as a hazardous guess, because I think in many.
Yes, I mean the language of liberalism definitely made Indians confront the caste question in very, very different ways. I mean, the notion of equality with which they had to understand, a deviation from it was very different. I mean, you've had caste being questioned even in pre-British times, but not through the lens of liberalism. It was a very different sort of a questioning. So liberalism and the associated language of rights and non-discrimination, and that allowed for a completely different engagement in how the public institutions need to be designed and how one actually imagined equality in modern spaces. Yes, and the
relationship, the caste power equations between different castes. Like I'm caste A, I have a certain domain, a power. You're caste B, you have a certain power. This modern institution certainly created a lot of lopsided, asymmetrical relationships. So suddenly caste A, because it doesn't send its children to do barrister in London, found at a complete loss, having to knock the doors of caste B because they produced a lot of barristers and lawyers.
So you have old hierarchies confronting new hierarchies, and and often there were continuities. It was not always completely in disjunction with it. In fact, the continuities were fairly massive. I would think, which actually allowed for a transition without much violence. But the discontinuities are also very real and very important. And and I think it's not a successful transplantation of one social order by another. You see both notions of social orders coexisting in the minds, which is why it's difficult to understand. A modern Indian. What is a modern Indian's mind like is difficult. Unlike the middle class that you talked about in England, which felt aware that it was the middle class in the sense that it was grown up outside of a feudal structure. Is there a similar outside with which Indians have grown up? Impossible. You're in a city, but the old social order is very much part of the city's imagination. So it's been a more difficult terrain to inhabit and navigate. Kaustav, but thank you again.
Thank you. And I just one last point for your students, and then I'm saying goodbye.
Yes.
Having lived in 4 countries, studied in 3, Germany, Belgium, and Britain, I think the story of post-colonial Asia is very, very fascinating. Please go and plot the number of centuries, not years, it took for Britain to arrive where they did, compared to Singapore, India, Vietnam, or even China. I mean, West grew collectively. Here, the story of 150 years, and it's still marching, is so fascinating. I think sometimes I used Western tools to learn more about myself. West is interesting. I love it. I relish the civilization. But East, modern story of East is very fascinating, right from Japan to Malaysia, to Indonesia, to India. And that's going to be my next. I hope I can come back in a few years' time to present my current research, which I'm working on, the Southeast Asian civil service histories. Hopefully, I'll be able to complete. Hopefully, Chandan will invite me. And hopefully, I'll make the presentation. So thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.